Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. Today we'll begin our consideration of spies and intelligence in China, where agent activity proliferated, and both the theory and practice were extensively discussed, unlike in the West. Although fervently acknowledged by many as vital to the state, critical Confucian voices never cease condemning spies' duplicity, not to mention his perniciousness. A famous Ming commander even expressed disbelief that the theories and writings of old had managed to survive in the court's poisonous atmosphere. In our several talks, we'll consider China's extensive use of agents. Although I'll examine numerous aspects, the presentations will focus on the core ideas and the essential practices. However, for details and more comprehensive analysis, including important passages and reprisals of actual missions, some of which dramatically altered the course of Chinese history, I'll be unabashedly referring to several of my books, since I'm the only one who seems to have an interest in this aspect of China's history. The Tao of Spycraft, Lever of Power, and the Tao of Deception, all of which have been well reviewed, especially in professional journals such as the CIA's Studies in Intelligence, and they've been translated into Chinese and Russian, and are reportedly used in spy agencies throughout the world. And you might also consider my recent translation of Zhu Fengjia's Chien Shu, or Book of Spies. Despite being largely confined to line-of-sight observation, deliberate efforts to gather information about enemies in China undoubtedly commenced with the earliest Neolithic conflicts. However, some historians believe that King Shao Kang of the Xia initiated the use of spies when he dispatched an agent to clandestinely observe his father's murderer in 1875 BC, while he himself secretly developed the power needed to restore Xia rule. According to some accounts, the agent eventually assassinated the man, prefiguring the activist thrust of Chinese intelligence. Now, as we discussed in Sun Tzu 11, Employing Spies, Sun Tzu's infamous chapter is the world's first focal examination of intelligence issues and spycraft. In concluding his contemplation, Sun Tzu acknowledged the importance of two men whom he regarded as China's first spies, Yi Yin and the Taigong, thereby essentially canonizing them. Lu Shang, best known as the Taigong from his title, acted as chief strategist to Kings Wan and Wu of the Zhou as they plotted the state's ascension and the Shang's overthrow. Having reportedly been an official, he was a true defector, a man motivated by righteousness to rectify the perverse situation created by tyrannical Shang rule. Although questions about his historicity continue to be raised, bronze inscriptions confirm he played a crucial role, much as portrayed in the traditional historical writings. Oracle bone inscriptions from the Shang dynasty show that Yi Yin held a respected place in the ancestral hierarchy until the dynasty's very end. Now it appears he was a true internal spy, someone dispatched to serve in the Xia palace and gain vital information, as well as possibly subvert the Xia. Warring States work depicts him as a moral paragon who possessed the deviousness of a seasoned spy. Now, quoting, Emperor Jie of the Xia was immoral, brutal, perverse, stupid, and greedy. All under heaven quaked in fear and were greatly troubled. The common masses, in consternation and confusion, wished to emigrate elsewhere. Afraid to speak directly about the situation, they lived in constant terror. Now, the difficulty of knowing the actual circumstances should be noted. Quote, reports of his deeds were contradictory and confused, so it was difficult for anyone to fathom the true situation. Wanting, as well as needing, to dispel this uncertainty, King Tang decided to dispatch Yi Yin to investigate. To ensure his credibility as a defector wouldn't be questioned, Tang reportedly resorted to the ploy of suffering flesh, kuroji, which we'll talk about later. Accordingly, in a staged incident, he concocted evidence of his displeasure by shooting Yi in the shoulder with an arrow. 3 years later, showing they're playing a long game, Yi returned and reported, quote, "Earlier, King Jie's consort, Mo Shi, mesmerized and deluded him, but now he loves his 2 concubines from Minshan, so he doesn't have any concern for the common people. The populace doesn't support him. Their hearts are filled with resentment. The upper and lower ranks detest each other, and they all say heaven fails to pity them. Therefore the Shah's mandate has ended." Sent back to the Shah, Yi managed to learn from the now spurned Mo Shi that the previous night the emperor dreamt there was a sun in the west and a sun in the east. When the 2 suns engaged in combat, the western sun emerged victorious, and the eastern sun was vanquished. Now, since the Shang lay in the east, Jie's dream prophesied a Shah victory. However, King Tang ingeniously exploited it by plotting an arduous trek that brought the army around to the west for an assault, as discussed in our first talk on ancient Chinese battles. Though that shouldn't have changed the Shang's identity as the eastern sun, it reportedly terrified Jie into fleeing, even before their armies clashed. Now, this episode incorporates 3 crucial elements of spycraft. First, from the outset, Yi Yin was deliberately employed as a covert agent to determine the true state of affairs. Second, he was given a plausible pretext for seeking refuge with Jie, a visible arrow room, though certainly rumors and vividly inaccurate accounts of Tang's hatred for him no doubt preceded his appearance at the Shah capital, both naturally and I'm sure as the result of disinformation efforts. Third, the licentious Jie succumbed to the allure of beauty, just as in the subsequently formulated ploy of beautiful women, Mei Run Ji, albeit not of the Shang's doing. Now, before becoming too immersed in this intriguing material, let's take a brief look at the earliest terms used for spies and spying. The 2 Chinese characters that essentially became synonymous with spy or covert agent have their origin in the spring and autumn period before Sunzi, but several others, such as Sheng, Shi, Guan, and Kui, that generally entail looking at, observing, or listening to, were also employed in contexts that clearly entail a clandestine character. Nevertheless, the most important character was Jian, as in the title of the Art of War chapter, employing agents, Yong Jian. In its original form of Xian, it encompassed several meanings, only one of which connoted secret activities, in which case it was pronounced Jian. The character consists of a signifier depicting the leaves of a traditional Chinese double door or a gate exterior, and a partial moon between them. As the meaning evolved over the centuries, a variant that substituted the image of the sun for the moon, the character Jian, as in Yong Jian, became more common. In both characters, the idea of glimpsing the moon or the sun through double doors gives birth to meanings such as crevice, the space between, and by abstraction, an interval in time. As a verb, jian came to signify estrange, separate, or put space between, and thereby designate the covert activity of sowing dissension among the powerful and estranging rulers from their ministers. From this basic image came the extended meaning of peering through a crevice, learning what lies inside closed doors, and thus to spy on. The second important character, die, being composed from the signifier for words or speech on the left and right hand, the foliage of a tree, prompted speculation that initially referred to someone hiding in a tree, covertly listening to others. It soon came to function both as a noun, referring to spies, and as a verb, to spy on, as well as to designate reconnaissance scouts, or maybe clandestinely observing. However, it doesn't become common until the Warring States period, when the compound term jiandie, meaning spy, eventually appears. One classic text, however, suggests that jian are concerned with minor matters, and die with larger ones, but there's no basis for that. Even though the art of war uses the term Jian, neither the 5 types of spies nor their activities are all-encompassing. Numerous state officials were already observing both friends and enemies, pondering their observations in accord with the standards and the practices of the times, and reporting their conclusions. Emissaries and messengers, dispatched on supposedly diplomatic missions, openly undertook the responsibility. But other officials were also dispatched solely for clandestine purposes, whatever their contrived mission. Numerous examples, some of them highly convoluted, Confucian-oriented interpretations, in which minor, very minor, ritual transgressions are signs of significant character flaw or perverse intent, are preserved in the Zhoujuan, a record of the times. However, we'll limit ourselves to considering 2 officials with sweeping intelligence-gathering responsibilities, perhaps the first officials in China. The Zhou dynasty's Qing run appears to have been the first Chinese administrative official assigned responsibility for intelligence activities. His title is composed by the characters Xing, meaning to travel, perform some action, sometimes even walk, and run, man or human being. The posts and its duties varied from state to state, but entities that adopted Zhou-style bureaucratic organization employed them. Although they ranked below the prime minister, they still resided at the apex of power, even functioned as specialized ministers for war and public works. Now, Qing run served from untitled messengers through diplomatic couriers, protocol directors, secretaries of state, sometimes even foreign ministers. Now, according to the rites of Zhou, the great Qing run, quote, administers the rites for important visitors and the formal ceremonies for major guests that are designed to gain the allegiance of the feudal lords. From time to time, he conducts friendly missions of inquiry to unite the feudal lords. At other times, imperial audiences are employed to eliminate hidden evil. On an annual basis, the great Qing run makes inquiries among the feudal lords in order to fathom their intentions. The Xiao, or minor Qing run, seems to have shouldered the burden for the more detailed external work. For, quote, he administers the rites of tribute for the submissive states and attends to the emissaries from the 4 quarters. Far more important, he was responsible for seeing that all the information about deaths, famine, military clashes, auspicious affairs, and disasters were properly recorded for both immediate and future use. The first official staff position with clearly defined intelligence responsibilities thus seems to have been the minor Qing run, who operated within the purview of the great Qing run, who himself was a sort of State Department intelligence director. When functioning as a messenger, the Xiao minor Qing run not only returned with a reply, but he also reported his observations and conclusions. In a battlefield context, he and the other messengers, who were theoretically protected by protocol from danger, were expected to note the enemy's strength, readiness, spirit, and other crucial factors, including the names of the various commanders and the nature of the component forces. And sometimes they were actually experienced military commanders, rather than just civil officials. It might be noted that Wu Zishu, who we've already encountered in our talks on the art of war, was appointed a Qing run when he fled to Wu, a post he retained throughout his career, so as to plot against Chu. Thank you for watching.